The murder of Helen Jewett is a very interesting murder case that occurred on April 10, 1836, in Lower Manhattan, New York City. Helen Jewett was allegedly murdered by a man named Richard P. Robinson. The murder case went to trial and he was found not guilty. There were many versions of what happened that night and many controversies during the trial that the jury was instructed to go against key witnesses' testimonies and who Helen Jewett actually was. Helen Jewett was born in the state of Maine in January 1812, but her actual birth name was Maria Benson. Her father worked in the lumber industry, but unfortunately died a year after her birth. Her mother was left to support her child by herself, so she began teaching at a country school. When Helen was 6, her mother died, and she was taken in by Judge Western's family. In 1826, she moved to Portland to attend a female seminary. She then moved to Boston, where she resided in 1826 and took the name of Helen Jewett. She was kept by a wealthy Southern gentleman where she was a mistress, but the most predominant establishment where she lived was a house in Franklin Street, whom the housekeeper was Rosina Townsend. The murder occurred on April 10, 1836, between the hours of 12 and 3 in the morning. There are multiple stories of what happened that night, from Richard P. Robinson, who was the accused murderer, and from a gentleman that was fully acquainted with Helen, as seen in the primary sources. Helen was murdered by a blow to the head by a hatchet and was set on fire. Her body was badly burned by the blaze. Richard P. Robinson said that he was at her house that night, but believes Mrs. Townsend, the housekeeper, would have no idea that it was him. When she brought up wine to them, he had his back to the door, and Helen abruptly shut the door so she could not see who was there. In her testimony, she said that she saw him, and he believes that she had no way of knowing it was him. Also, he was the last person to see her alive. There was evidence of his cloak that was found in the backyard. There was also evidence that someone went over white fences in the backyard, and when he was found, he had white paint marks on him. He said that he admits to being there, jumping over fences, but he says that he was back at his boarding house when the clock struck 1 and fast asleep. But this puts him there between the times of the murder. The lies don't end there. During the trial, many suspicious things happened. There were many different testimonies that conflicted each other, and some of the jury was said to be friends of Robinson. The judge also told the jury that the testimonies from the prostitutes are not entitled to credit unless their testimonies are drawn from other sources. Robert Furlong, whose testimony was said to have gotten Robinson off without any punishment, later committed suicide, which is said to be because he lied during the case and had a guilty conscience. During this time in history, women were not really protected or valued. For example, rapes would be committed and blamed on the women, saying that it was their fault because of the way they dressed, the things that they said or that they did. Women were not valued equally, and prostitutes' character was criticized. Their testimony was not considered to be accurate and had no value in the courts. Prostitutes were not treated like human beings and are seen as objects. During the time of the murder, Sarah Grimke, who was a women's rights advocate, was eventually silenced by male advocates who considered her public speaking to be a liability. And in 1837, a year after the murder, the first National Female Anti-Slavery Society Convention met in New York City. There were many female rights movements that started around the time of the murder, but basically all of them were silenced by male advocates. This event that happened in 1836, the murder of Helen Jewett, is an important part of history as it illustrates how women were treated and devalued. We can learn from this event to improve women's rights.